All right. This isn't really happening. This is just a dream. This is all in my head. I'm going to wake up and none of this is going to be real. It's just a dream.
No, it's not, boy.
So Phantasm 2 tells the story of Reggie and Mike years after their first encounter with the tall man, cocked, locked, and ready to fucking rock on a revenge mission to stop the tall man and his reign of terror forever. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Phantasm review series. If you missed the Phantasm review for the first original film, that is on my channel, so go check that out before you see this one. Just like the first video, Lee from Drum Dums, he's doing this review series along with me. I'm a longtime fan of this franchise. He's watching all these films for the very first time right before his review, so right after you get done with this review, Lee's review over on Drum Dums, go check that out because that's uploaded right now. So, looking forward to seeing what his thoughts are, but as far as my thoughts on Phantasm 2, let's go. So Phantasm 2 is basically the aliens of the Phantasm franchise. And what I mean by that is that it's a very similar debate with fans between Alien and Aliens, just like the debate of Phantasm and Phantasm 2. Phantasm was very cerebral, very psychological, you know, a lot of sci-fi, a movie trying to get inside of your head and fuck with you mentally. Phantasm 2 trims a lot of that down, goes for a lot more mainstream feel. It ramps up the action, it ramps up the production, it ramps up a lot as far as, like, you know, just the high energy of the movie. And it's much more of an action-packed, kind of straightforward, almost slasher-like sequel. This movie was picked up by Universal. It was handed a $3 million budget because they wanted their own horror franchise to start up alongside all the other horror franchises going. And it took 9 years for Don Coscarelli to find an idea for a sequel. So you get all this together and they just went for a balls to the wall badass sequel that is Phantasm 2. And I will say right away, this was going to kind of color the rest of my review, I often debate on which one is my favorite, Phantasm or Phantasm 2. If you ask me today, it's Phantasm. You ask me tomorrow, it's Phantasm 2. Nonetheless, this movie is kick fucking ass. Rolling right into my positives for Phantasm 2, I will say I really like the approach that they took for this sequel. Some of the best sequels of all time, not only just in the horror genre, but just in any genre of film. Some of the best sequels of all time do a good job at just kind of capturing the heart, taking the meat and potatoes and taking what you know, the heart and soul of that original film, and going in a completely different direction while keeping what makes that original film great. You saw it in Alien and Aliens, you saw it in Terminator, Terminator 2, and you see that in Phantasm and Phantasm 2. Like I said, they kind of strip back a lot of the more cerebral, kind of mind-fucky version of the original Phantasm, trying to get into your head and just creating a lot of questions. Is it a dream? Is it reality? Phantasm 2 is much more straightforward. It's much more in a slasher vein. It's a road revenge movie. You got Mike and Reggie that are basically on the road for months trying to hunt down the tall man, going through all these small cities that he has already wiped out, robbed all the graves, you know, have his Jawas running all over the place. He's trying to find the tall man to stop him, and you're just along the ride on this kick-ass little action horror adventure that is Phantasm 2. And it's just a great change of pace from the first movie, because I love the first movie. I love how kind of terrifying it is and how trippy it is, and just even years later, as many times as I've watched that movie, there's still things about it that I'm, you know, trying to uncover and trying to figure out my own explanations for. And then you get into this sequel and it's kind of like a moment to breathe. You let go a lot of that cerebral stuff. You go for a little bit more streamlined experience, a lot more of a broad appeal, I will say. But you also get just kind of this entertainment value that really isn't there in the first movie. It's entertaining as hell for me because I love that movie, but as far as just pure unadulterated entertainment, Phantasm 2 definitely has the first movie beat. And this movie does benefit from that heightened budget. You can tell where the money went. There's a lot of really, really good practical effects in this movie with the different monsters and some of the kind of apparitions that Mike sees throughout this movie.
You play a good game, boy. Come east if you dare.
Get the fuck back!
all the set pieces, the houses, the abandoned houses that they break into and kind of stow away into, the graveyards, these dilapidated towns that they go through. I mean, there's a lot of production value in this movie that, you know, wasn't quite there in what was obviously a much lower budget first film. So Phantasm 2, just in the production value alone, does feel like a ramped up sequel. And though it is a big topic of controversy for diehard Phantasm fans, I will be one of the few that will say I think James LeGros is a little bit better in the role of Mike. You know, they had this whole deal with Universal. Whenever Don Coscarelli got the money for this movie, Universal told him, you can only keep one. If you're gonna bring back A. Michael Baldwin to play Mike, that's fine, but then you're gonna leave Reggie Bannister out of it, or you can keep Reggie and you can leave A. Michael Baldwin out of it, but we don't want you to have both of these actors. And Don Coscarelli went with Reggie. He said, give me Reggie, I'll recast Mike. And honestly, as much as I love Mike in that first movie, I do think it was the better choice because Reggie Bannister is the heart and soul of this franchise. I mean, I cannot imagine the Phantasm franchise if that role would have been recasted or if that character was not in the sequels. It just, Reggie is a piece of Phantasm that can never be changed, taken out, or altered at all.
Shit, Mike. Have you looked at her? You know, we've been out here a long time. Besides, it gets hard on the road.
Reg, you're thinking with your wrong head.
Mike, on the other hand, I do think James LeGros plays the character a little bit better in this sequel. He's a little bit more, you know, believable as this person with a vendetta. You really do feel like he could do some damage to the tall man or any of the tall man's, you know, little lackeys. He does feel like he kind of embodies that character that's kind of just hell-bent for revenge a little bit better than I believe A. Michael Baldwin would have been able to. I mean, maybe, we'll never know. If A. Michael Baldwin had been in this movie, maybe he would have been great too, but I do like what James LeGros brings to this role.
He's gotta be stopped, and I'm going after him. I know I can find him. But to kill him, I'm gonna need your help.
And going back to Reggie, Reggie's role really gets ramped up in this movie too. It's kind of like a flip from the situation in the first movie where the first one follows Jody and Mike, and Reggie's just kind of like this character that comes in every once in a while throughout the movie. In this movie, obviously Jody's gone since he died at the end of the first one. Now you have Reggie and Mike, and Reggie's role is as big as Mike's, really. I mean, Mike has more of the story, but Reggie is all the entertainment. He's the guy that has all the good lines. He's kind of a badass in this movie, which you will see through the rest of this franchise. He always hooks up with some crazy ass chick and has some wild sex scene that's just bizarre to watch, but it's fucking hilarious if you are a fan of what's going on. And just the character I love to death. I just love that goofy charm that Reggie brings to everything. This ex-ice cream vendor that's gonna take on this demon trying to take over the world. I mean, it writes itself. And of course, you can't talk about Phantasm without talking about Angus Scrimm. And Angus Scrimm is just as awesome as the tall man as he was in the first movie.
You think that when you die, you go to heaven. You come to us.
He doesn't get quite as much screen time in the first movie, and I will say he's not quite as intimidating of a figure as that first movie, because this one he's much more of just kind of like the big boss, if you will, for you video game fans, where the first one he was the whole evil presence. But he does do great about just bringing over all those little ticks that he brought to the tall man, you know, the eye, and you know, the way that he says boy, and the way that he talks to different characters. He brings all that over into this. He's got some great scenes, and just like I said with Reggie Bannister, Phantasm could not exist without Angus Scrimm. He makes that villain, and the villain makes Phantasm. So Angus Scrimm, awesome in Phantasm 2 yet again. And moving on beyond your main characters, I really love how they ramped up all of the villains, like the side villains and the spheres and everything in Phantasm 2. It's a much more, you know, beefed up army that the tall man has this time around. He's got grave diggers, he's got morticians and everything under his side, he's got dead people walking around that are reanimated. Of course, his little Jawas that I always call them, the hooded midgets, he's got all of those as well, and they're just coming in droves, especially in the opening of this movie, which is just an awesome opening scene where just these Jawas are freaking taking over Reggie's house, and it just looks like there's dozens of them. And the way that they ramped up the production value on the spheres alone is just worth its weight in gold. Because in the first movie, that's one of the most iconic scenes, if not the most iconic scene of the original film, when that sphere comes out of nowhere, attaches itself to that dude's head, and scrambles his brain and shoots it out of that little hole. In this movie, they've got saw blades, they've got, you know, these little rotary blades, it's got lasers and fucking night vision and all kinds of crazy stuff. Totally like a James Cameron version of these spheres, and they are badass. And they give you some awesome kill scenes in Phantasm 2 as well. As iconic as that original movie is for that scene, Phantasm 2 just ramps that shit up to 11. And when you put all those pieces together, this is such an entertaining, kick-ass ride of a movie because this movie is paced so well. It starts off just gunning for it, this opening scene. It starts right at the very last second of the first Phantasm movie, and then you get into this, you know, time jump. It gets into the exposition, tries to explain to you what's going on as best as it can in a Phantasm movie, because every Phantasm movie has its own collection of what the fuck is going on moments. They get you through that, and then you're just right into this road movie where you get these two badass characters hunting down this other badass character, and it's just crazy shit galore over and over and over again, all the way until this thrilling climax that ends in just such a great note for a horror movie, leaving things wide open for another movie. Perfect way to end it, and it's just a great way that they pace this movie, that it just never lets up. Once this thing gets going, it never lets up. And of course, one of my favorite things about this franchise is the score. And while the score isn't quite as iconic as that first movie, they changed it up a little bit. They make it a little bit more action-y in this second movie. I still really like the score. I mean, that iconic piece of music of the Phantasm, you know, dun, 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 that shit's still there. So as long as you got that, you got me. But everything else throughout this movie, it's much more in line with the pace that they're going for and the tone that they're going for. They had to switch it up a little bit because the score from the first movie wouldn't make sense here. It's not quite as iconic as that one, like I said, but a very good version. It's just like the Halloween movies. It's the same score, it's just tweaked in a couple of different ways, and it works for what they're trying to do for Phantasm 2. I'm a huge fan of the humor that they put in this one. You know, that's another thing that really helps the pace, and it kind of helps change up the levity of the movie a little bit. There's not too many funny moments in the first movie. When you get to this one, especially surrounding the character of Reggie, just some of the situations that he gets into and like the chainsaw fight that he has, you know.
Come on, you mother!
That shit's classic. I mean, you always harken back to like kills or, you know, certain practical effects or gory moments in certain horror movies that you always remember them for. But when you have good little jokey moments like that you can also remember it for, it just makes you love the movie that much more. Oh, and can we talk about that Hemikuda, please? Look, I know some of you guys are huge fanatics of mine, and it would be a very hard gift for me to accept because it's just such a grand gesture. But if any of you guys love me that much, if you find a Hemikuda just, you know, abandoned on the side of the road, or, you know, with some owners that might be at a rest stop in the bathroom somewhere, you know, whatever the situation may be, if you find one of these things and you find the kindness in your heart to bring it down to Georgia, just kind of hand it to me as like a gift. You know, this is your lifelong achievement award, this Hemikuda, that is the car that you have wanted your entire life, all the way through your childhood, ever since you watched Phantasm and Phantasm 2. You will be my biggest fan. I will give you a free t-shirt, I promise. Oh, and I'll go ahead and say this too. That little 4-barrel shotgun that Reggie fashions together in this movie, probably the most badass weapon in any horror movie ever.
God damn it.
But as far as negatives for Phantasm 2, I really only have two, and they're very minimalistic because I love this movie to death, but they are worth notating. The first one is just that this movie to me is a huge step down as far as the scare factor goes. The first movie is genuinely terrifying. If you watch that movie, especially back when it first came out, I mean, it's dreadful to watch. Like the tone, the eeriness of that movie, the complete just what the fuck is going on. I have no idea what is safe and what is not feeling that you get. The first movie is a classic horror film. When you get into Phantasm 2, it's much more of the action, you know, Aliens version of it. And just like from Alien to Aliens, I feel like the terror and the horror and the dread gets toned down quite a bit in favor of entertainment value, which is great, but this movie's not very scary. It never scared me as a kid. Watching it as an adult, it's definitely not very scary. So if you're in for this movie to be scared, go to the first one. And my other very small negative is that even though I think Angus Scrimm does equally as good as a job portraying the character of the Tall Man, you do feel a little bit shortchanged with the Tall Man that you get in Phantasm 2 just because of his kind of scaled down screen time. He gets scaled down in favor of kind of expanding the other characters on the evil side, the Morticians, the Gravediggers, stuff like that, which is great stuff. But I do think there's room for a little bit more Tall Man in Phantasm 2. He's a very huge presence in the first movie, and his presence is there in Phantasm 2, but he just kind of pops in every once in a while to remind you that the Tall Man is running shit. When I feel like there was opportunity to really have some great iconic scenes with the Tall Man like that original film in here. So just small little nitpick, I would have used a little bit more Tall Man, but that's just me. But other than that, guys, I love this film to death. I mean, if you look back to our top 5 horror sequels that I also did with Lee from Drum Dums, Phantasm was number 2 on that list, if I'm not mistaken, as my favorite horror sequel of all time. I grew up with this movie, watched it, wore that VHS tape out. I still love it to death. It's just endlessly rewatchable. It's a blast of a movie, great sequel. Such a great change of pace from the first movie while still holding on to what made that first movie great, especially the characters. So can't say anything more great about Phantasm 2. Love this sequel to death. So if you're a fan of the first film, this is a must watch. And even if maybe you're not a fan of the first film, if you thought maybe it was a little too cerebral, a little too weird, this movie might work a lot more for you. So definitely check this movie out if some elements of the Phantasm franchise has you curious. Phantasm 2 is a phenomenal sequel. So once you check this thing out, absolutely go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of Phantasm 2? Are you a part of the world that goes with Phantasm as your favorite, or do you prefer Phantasm 2? Put your reasons why down below as well, and we will talk about it. And keep your eyes out, probably in the next maybe 3 weeks or so, maybe a little bit more. Me and Lee will get on to Lord of the Dead Phantasm 3. So keep your eyes out for that, guys. Please like, share this video, hit that subscribe button, and go over to Drum Dums if you are not already a subscriber over there, and hit the subscribe button on his channel after you watch his review, his first time viewing of Phantasm 2. Do me that favor, guys, please. Check out down below in the video description for his link to his channel. As also in the video description is my social media links like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spreadshirt for Cody Leach t-shirts and other merchandise, and my Patreon page, which is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for patron eyes only, such as the Blu-ray digital copy codes that I buy every single week. I give all those to my patrons. And you also, on certain tiers of my patronage, you get the ability to choose movies for me to review. So keep an eye out for those reviews coming soon as well, guys. Check all that out, and if you want to check out some of my videos, you can check out a few more by clicking right over here. Boy.